I believe the recording is. That haunting melodic sound. Who knew what that was? That is called the wail. It is the contact call between loons from one to the other. And I say it's kind of easy to remember if you think of it as, where are you? Where are you? For several years, I worked in environmental education and I coordinated the citizen science program called Loon Watch. Deploys hundreds of volunteers on inland glacial lakes to work with loon conservation and healthy lake habitats. One of the teams of scientists headed by Walter Piper made a remarkable discovery as they were banding loons. And so they could tell one loon from the other. Yes, the same loons return to the same lake every single year. They can live over 30 years in the wild, and they will continue to mate for life if both loons go to the same lake. If one of the loons leaves that lake, the loon will remain faithful to the lake, not the other loon. Chicks are born in places like up here in northern Wisconsin. They will actually fly after the adults have already left. They find their own way to the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean where they spend the winter, and then another 2 to 4 years before they are adults and they return. When they fly back for the first time, we found that they are typically within 30 miles of the lake that they were born on. Several species out there have similar stories. For humans, this kind of super geographic memory seems to be a bit lacking, as evidenced when I can't find my car after I go into the grocery store for about half an hour. But there is something really unique that human beings can develop, and it's what's called a sense of place. Today's message is called A Superior Blessing, exploring spiritual sense of place. And last month, when we held the water ceremony, the time where we tell stories of interconnection with water, of where we've been over the summer, where we bring those, pour them collectively back together. I heard the stories of going back to the rivers of your childhood. I heard the stories of journeying off beaten paths to sources of beauty and connection. And I remembered all of the ways in which water was brought together. And it made me think a lot about this place, this Lake Superior watershed, and some of the lessons that I've learned from the water that I would like to share with you today. So, sense of place, what is this term? We must ask the dear poet and farmer Wendell Berry for help with this. Wendell Berry often goes looking for hope and meaning, and he finds that it is intrinsically and irrevocably intertwined with being rooted in a place. In his poem, Sabbaths 6, he writes, "Because we have not made our lives to fit our places, the forests are ruined, the fields eroded, the streams polluted, the mountains overturned. Hope then to belong to your place by your own knowledge of what it is that no other place is, and by you caring for it as you care for no other place. This place that you belong to, though it is not yours, for it was from the beginning and will be till the end." Wendell Berry is so place-based. He says, if you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. This is more than just living somewhere. It is to be in relationship with space, geographic space, and time. It's not a sense of space, right? It's not just about a space that we occupy, but space and time equals place. And we can't know every place intimately. We just are limited. That's part of being human. And so part of having a sense of place is to be in that vulnerability of relationship, to know that the same water that has always been here will be here throughout the generations. I remember when I worked for Loon Watch that the people that sought me out with the most fervent desire were the people who had just found a lake with loons. And they were in their business clothes coming up to me at a booth at a convention center. And they were, giving these loon calls and what could it mean? And they were yodeling, into the convention center and telling me about these experiences. And I would answer with a fact, or I would answer with a kind of a life cycle, explanation. And that wasn't what they wanted. What they needed was to be heard, that they were, for the first time, having an experience that decentered themselves. It wasn't all about them. They wanted to know who this loon was, what they were doing, and how they could be a good neighbor. In fact, they started changing their language as I got to know them and they began volunteering. It went from the lake to my lake. The loons to my loons, not in ownership, but perhaps how I might say my spouse or my brother, in family, in a way that is in kinship. And it also came with what I call a filial piety, a family piety, a loyalty, sacrifice, and compassion. It was pretty amazing to see these transformations happening. But I think it's not only just a nice way to live. I find sense of place to be one of the anecdotes for some of the things that are disconnecting us and is one of the essential practices for human beings to survive and thrive. Let me explain. Wallace Stegner, who wrote a lot about sense of place in the American West, describes the displaced person. A persisting identity of the new world transient is the way he put it. The way I understand that is that being a displaced person is a product of colonialism. He describes the displaced person as an explorer outward, but not inward. Someone who is always seeking, striving, slightly antisocial, always in motion. In an essay in 1992, which is one of the first places we hear the term sense of place, he described it this way: to the placed person, the displaced person seems hasty, shallow, and restless. They have a current like the Platte, a mile wide and an inch deep. As a species, he is non-territorial. He lacks a stomping ground, acquainted with many places, but rooted in none. Culturally, they are a discarder or transplanter, not a builder or conserver. They seem to like and value this rootedness, though to the placed person, it shows the symptoms of nutritional deficiency, as if one suffers from some obscure scurvy or pellagra of the soul. In other words, Stegner is saying that to be displaced is not whole. It's an illness. And as someone who has studied religion and has studied about religion, the term meaning to connect again and again to that which has meaning, I have to wholeheartedly agree. The religious naturalist and philosopher of religion, Loyal Rue, in his book, Religion is Not About God, shares that there is a powerful new myth that is generating and encouraging this kind of displacement. He says that it's challenging all of the world's religions, even the most fervent ones. It is converting believers daily. Its rituals are so powerful, people participate in them without even knowing what they are. He calls it the myth of the marketplace, also known as consumerism. Its root metaphor is that a free market is self-regulating, and if we just keep it full of activity, it will provide for everyone's needs. Now, if you think about our cultural rituals, these days, most of them include going shopping. Our rituals, most of them include gifts and wrapping paper and all these things that we purchase. There's Black Friday that starts off what's considered the holiday season. Think about the aesthetics of a shopping mall. They're more like a cathedral. I think about where I grew up in Strip Mall City, South Dakota. The neighborhood Applebee's was next to the Target, was next to the Barnes and Nobles, and I've found this configuration all over America. A kind of familiarity. They even evoke a sense of hominess, and yet it is empty. Or at least that's how I felt growing up. I did not have a connection to what it meant to be in a place. But it's not just a feeling. Of course, we know that consumerism is a major force driving us towards the ecological crisis, most notably because consuming more resources releases more carbon in the atmosphere. And we've learned now that it's less about population and more about how many resources a population consumes. The extraction of natural resources and non-renewable resources is one thing that's extracted, but in extraction capitalism, they also have seen that we're actually extracting life expectancy. Being born in the Northern Hemisphere means that we have a higher life expectancy, which is literally extracted from the Southern Hemisphere, where places, things like poisonous industrial projects, placed in communities, pipelines, all of the things that go into creating what then is consumed is often not seen by the consumers. It's estimated that we are using 1.6 Earths worth of resources every single year. It's a major concern. So what's the possibility? What's the solution? Where do we go from here? Necesito del mar, porque me enseña. No sé si aprendo música o conciencia. No sé si es olo solo o ser profundo. Pablo Neruda's poem, El Mar, or the Sea, inspired me to take a semester of Spanish because I wanted to know this poem in its original language. I know, that sounds so, yeah, I know. It sounds like such a millennial thing to do. To be able to speak it in Spanish so that I could know its cadence and its syntax and its original construction, I wanted to know what the poet did to speak my truth. I need the sea because it teaches me. I don't know if I learn music or awareness, if it's a single wave or its vast existence, or only its harsh voice or its shining suggestion of fishes and ships. The fact is that until I fall asleep in some magnetic way, I move in the university of the waves. Oh, that poem. It speaks so deeply to what I found when I met Lake Superior. I'd never seen it before. And I went to this little college kind of on a whim. It was a long story. I won't get into it. But I went to this little college, Northland College in Ashland, Wisconsin. And for the first time in my life, having come from South Dakota, a place where within a 5-county radius, there was only one river that met the clean water standards of swimmable, drinkable, fishable. One stream in 5 counties. I would get ear infections and lung infections because they couldn't keep me out of the water, but it was not safe to be in. I met Lake Superior and I found this community, and I keep finding communities around Lake Superior. I think it has something to do with the fact that you just can't help but become a place-based person with such a powerful and beautiful and amazing and drinkable resource right in your midst. I remember one of the first conversations I had with a local. He was going out ice fishing and he said, yeah, I work for the Forest Service in the summer and I pretty much ice fish in the winter. And I said, oh goodness, so there's no jobs in the winter up here. He laughed and he said, of course there's jobs in the winter, but then I wouldn't have time to ice fish. He said, some of us up here have chosen a different way. And I didn't quite know what he was talking about. He was saying essentially, as I've gotten to know so many people, that it isn't about feeling guilty about consuming. It isn't about feeling like I can't use electricity and energy, but it is about being in relationship with all of those things. As the poet and botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer says, it's okay to use electricity and energy, but shouldn't we at least then think about where we put our energy? That is reciprocal relationship. And the big lake reminds us that connection is not just beaches and picnics and blow your mind sunsets, swimming and sailing, but also loss and cold, storms. And we are in relationship with it all. And the only way to make it through all of that chaos is not through individual strength or more possessions, but it's putting the most important things first. Family, love, beauty, connection. And when we do that, when we know those intrinsic values, that is when we know we are developing a sense of place. Now, I've heard people say that there's like a magnetic pull. When they leave the Lake Superior region, something pulls them back. And so I know I'm talking a lot and the sense of place can get very philosophical, but I just want to also spend just a moment with isotopes. No, I am not a scientist. Environmental ed, you dance a lot with biology and natural resources, but one of my friends, Dr. Tom Fitz, who's a geology professor at Northland College, shared this with a group of first-time students. He said that when you have water, for example, 2 atoms of hydrogen and a single atom of oxygen form this amazing new being, water, right? No properties of hydrogen and oxygen look like water, but when they come together, they form water. So that's just amazing. But not only that, but a molecule of water can have different number of neutrons, which means they have a different atomic mass, which means you can literally weigh them. And that different water has different properties depending upon where it comes from. So if you take a strand of your hair and the forensics labs go through it and analyze it, they can come within 70 to 90% accuracy of the watershed where you've been drinking water from. Literally, it takes about 4 years for the isotopes in your body to completely refresh and renew to be the water that you drink. So if you get your water from Lake Superior, from an aquifer, you become the same, your water, which is 83% of your blood and 75% of your brain and 22% of your bones. You become the water that you drink. So when it comes to having a sense of place, whether it is about knowing a place, whether it's about feeling connected to all of life, whether it's about being in relationship and reciprocal relationship with what it means to be alive and well, these things are carried through generations. We know that now, that we literally pass on our relationships with one another to future generations. The water we have here is the only water that will ever be here. It is through time and space. And so a sense of place encompasses all of that, not just the here and now, but the eternal as well. That is one of the things for me, that is the root metaphor of what it means to be. That if we are in reciprocal relationship with each other and with the elements, with the food we eat, with the birds that live in the tree next to the homes where we dwell in, that is one of the antidotes to climate change, injustice, and inequality throughout the world. It is a radical act and simply have a sense of place. That's what I believe. I'm really curious to know what you think. And after our closing hymn, We Would Be One, we'll have time for reflections and conversations. Where have you experienced awe and connection in nature? What does sense of place mean to you? What does it mean to be of this place? Allow some of these things we've talked about today to just integrate and swirl and ground as we listen to this almost beloved hymn, We Would Be One.